Good evening, everybody. This is Moving Home with Charlie, with me, Charlie Lambden, and this evening, unscheduled, unplanned live stream to talk about the Renters Reform Bill that was presented in Parliament today, or had a reading in Parliament today, and why, despite its good intentions to help tenants, it's going to continue the backfiring of government policy on the private renter sector that began when Shelter started lobbying the government to start hitting landlords back in 2017. There is now plenty of evidence to show that that did backfire, and as a direct result of Shelter's lobbying of government and the changes to Section 24 regulations. Both rents shot up and homelessness shot up. So, the purpose of this video is to help everyone who wants to understand what's gone wrong, why, what the government's planning to do about it now, and why it's mostly a terrible idea, even though I'm not against the intentions of parts of it. That's what this video is about. Because there is a huge popular misunderstanding about what the problem is and why. And the whole poor tenants, landlords bad messaging is divisive and unhelpful. And when you think about the fact that anybody who wants to rent a decent home and feel secure in it needs a landlord, why would you want to go about metaphorically punching landlords collectively in the face when you need more of them, when we need more of them? And yet all the government policy has done is make less of them, hundreds of thousands less of them in the last few years. Now, my motivation, as I repeatedly state on this channel, is my goal, my stated goal is a home for everyone, whether it's buying, whether it's renting, everyone getting the home that they want. That's my end goal. I'm not on landlord's side, I'm not on tenant's side, I'm not on buyer's side, I'm not on seller's side. I am on the side of moving home being easier so that more people can get into their homes. And what I'm going to say in this video is probably going to irritate landlords and tenants because there's this sort of battle on each side. First of all, most tenants are happy with their landlords, and most tenant-landlord relationships function okay, and the tenants have a long-term secure home. The landlords have a viable business, because remember, being a landlord is not an investment, and it's a mistake to think it is. And one of the reasons that we're in the problem we're in now with not enough affordable homes to rent is because of how many people thought being a landlord was an investment rather than a business. Okay. I'm talking about the private rented sector, not about government and social housing, although the government's failure on social housing is another massive contributing factor to the reason that rents have shot up. For anyone who can be bothered to go and look up in history, a free, unfettered marketplace is the least bad option overall, notwithstanding its problems. Now, today, Labour's announced, and by the way, there's a link to this below in the description, and they've published the document. Here it is. Where is it? They published a press release, actually. And I just want to read you through a little bit of this because it's posturing, it's publicity seeking, it's vote winning, and it's not going to solve the problem. And they don't understand the problem because they haven't acknowledged the causes of the problem that we have today. And the causes of the problem we have today are not bad landlords. Do bad landlords exist? Yes. Should they be dealt with? Yes. Is this how to do it? No. And I'm coming at this from a completely neutral, outside, impartial, unbiased observer and commenter, and someone who's been working within the property sector for over 25 years. I've been a landlord myself multiple times. I haven't been for a long time. I've been a tenant myself multiple times. And I have actually personally designed and had built lettings management software that manages the relationship between tenants and landlords and the property and the finances. So I've seen it at a micro level up close through loads and loads of different estate agents, software and lettings businesses. So I have arguably a very unusual and broad perspective on this. Nobody would be battering landlords collectively as a whole if rents weren't horribly expensive and overpriced and affordability of rent being at its worst for a long time. Okay. When prices went up, everyone thought, oh, that's because landlords are greedy. Are there some greedy landlords? Yes, of course there are. And I'm not going to defend the shameless greedy landlords who are very much on the fringe and the margins of being of landlords, right? And more of them came along because of the government policy to allow buy-to-let mortgages freely available to anyone, so anyone could be a landlord. I mean, think about how unwise and foolish that is. Let's just make it so that anyone can be a landlord. They can get the money, buy a buy-to-let property, rent it out, and be a landlord when they don't understand the responsibilities, the risks, and the actual work involved in supplying a safe, habitable, decent home on a long-term basis to people who need homes. And this is important because as a country, one of our biggest crises right now is the lack of availability of decent, affordable homes, both to buy and to rent. And that affects everybody, because if you don't have a decent, safe, affordable place to live, everything else in your life gets harder. It hits people's productivity, it hits people's morale, it hits people's mental health, it hits the country as a whole when housing isn't affordable. And contrary to popular belief, landlords can't just dictate whatever rent they feel like. And I'm going to explain in this video why, right? They just can't do it. The market dictates the prices in the same way as for sales, people buying and selling houses. The market dictates the price. You can put any asking price you like on a house trying to sell. It does not mean you're going to get it. And most people don't get the asking price they're asking for. Okay. But yet a lot of tenants who justifiably and understandably frustrated and cross that, first of all, renting a home seems so far out of reach, and B, when they try, it's just a horrible process where they feel like they're trampled on by a stampede of people with more money than them, and it's just impossible to move on with your life. And so I completely understand why there are lots of very angry tenants. But it is not the landlords, on the whole, generally speaking, it is not the landlord's fault. The market is why rents are expensive. And it is the regulators of the market and the policymakers of the market who are responsible for that. So the number one reason rents are horribly expensive in too many places for people entering the housing market as tenants is because there aren't enough of them. Not enough have been built because planning permission has been withheld or is too difficult to get in the places that it's needed. And this has been a failure of successive governments. And this is not going to be a party political observation, because both governments have been equally as bad as each other and continuing to get worse. And as bad as the Tories were in this exact regard, Labour are about to make it worse. Let me explain how and why. So first of all, I need to explain, how do we get here? Why are we in a position where most young people can't afford a decent place to rent where they want to rent? Is it because landlords are greedy and they've just ratcheted up the prices? No, they can't do that. If they could, then you would see much more rampant greed happening. And contrary to popular belief, if as a landlord you try and squeak the absolute maximum market price out of a tenant, experienced landlords will know that that tenant will not stay there very long, is likely to default, and you're going to have a void and a turnaround quite soon, which is a hassle if you're a landlord. If you're a good landlord, what you want is a tenant who pays their rent on time and looks after your property and plans to stay a long time. That is the most profitable kind of tenant. And that's why the most intelligent landlords and the most successful landlords are the ones who take the long-term view and reward well-behaved tenants. And I don't just mean tenants who adhere to the terms of the tenancy agreement. That's the minimum standard you've got to do. But actually tenants who are cooperative. They're cooperative if there's a problem. And you obviously need a cooperative landlord as well. So when you've got a tenant who behaves in a positive way towards the property and the landlord, they're going to get a more positive reaction from the landlord. And if the landlord is a good professional landlord that understands their obligations, it's going to be a happy long-term relationship. And this is mostly the case, right? Most people renting have nice long-term homes with a decent landlord that looks after the place and is flexible. And it works, and flexibility works for both sides, and it's great, okay? When you get new entrants to the market who think it's an investment rather than a service business, who can't afford to fix appliances when they go wrong, and who can't afford to fix the damp because they borrowed themselves up to the hilt. And these are the landlords who, because they borrowed up to the hilt, they want to maximize their yield, and so they want to get the maximum price. So they do just go, right, agent, find me as many tenants as possible and just take the highest bid, which is just stupid. Intelligent landlords don't go for the highest possible price. And I know this not only from my 25 years in the industry, but also anecdotally from friends right now who've rented places from landlords because the tenant had a fantastic reputation locally with his previous landlord, and the new landlord went, "You're welcome. You know, what can you comfortably afford? That's fine by me, because this landlord is not leveraged up, right? And I hope he stays I hope he stays forever." And he's happy, the landlord's happy. It's brilliant. Okay, so landlords, I see so much foaming at the mouth on social media about landlords. And absolutely, some landlords do act in a way that does deserve that reaction. But it is a huge mistake if you are an angry tenant to think that all landlords are the same. It's like thinking that all estate agents are bad. No, they're not. Lots of them might be bad. They are not all bad. And there are some really, really good ones. And when you say, oh, they're all bad, what you're doing is precluding the chance of finding a good one because you don't think they're there. And it's the same with landlords. There are exceptionally good landlords out there. There are modestly good landlords out there. There are below average landlords out there, just a bit flaky and crap, but they're basically okay, but it's just a bit crap and a bit of an effort. And you have to kick them up the arse to get what you need as a tenant. And then there are the absolute shyster sharks who break the rules, rip people off, threaten people. And the number one reason for their existence is the government's failure to enforce existing rules. And I want all tenants to understand that. The number one reason that we have a dysfunctional rental market right now, more than anything else, is as the government's failure to enforce existing legislation on landlords. And if they had done, landlords would be behaving better already. I mean, there's a long, long, long list of ways in which landlords can behave well or badly, as there is a long, long list of ways that tenants can behave well or badly. And it is simply misguided, unwise, foolish, unhelpful, and ultimately destructive for both the government and the media to keep on saying landlord bad, poor tenant, landlord bad, poor tenant. It's because in both groups of people, you've got well-behaved people and badly behaved people. And tenants, I can assure you, act badly in greater proportion of numbers than landlords do. And I say this as an impartial observer, and it gets no coverage in the media. You get the occasional one, right? The occasional one that looks like, but actually in very large proportions and numbers, tenants who, by the way, have this poor attitude because they've already believed in the media. Landlord's bad. Landlord's bad. Therefore, the landlord's automatically bad. We may not even have met them, but we're going to assume they're bad. So therefore, we're going to treat their property badly because they're a dirty, bad, nasty landlord. And so you get tenants going in thinking, well, I'm paying for this place, so I'm gonna act like an angry customer that's not getting what I want. And you're missing the point. And so many tenants trash landlords' properties to the extent that the damage deposit is never going to cover it. And there are feckless tenants, as there are feckless landlords. But there are feckless tenants who just can't be bothered, just won't bother paying the rent. They just take the piss. There are tenants who just take the piss because the law is already more on the tenant side than it is on the landlord side. Okay? And they get away with it. And if you are a good landlord and you end up with a bad tenant, you are fucked. You are so fucked as a landlord if you've got a bad tenant sitting there. That tenant knows that they can get away with just sitting there for about a year because they can stay there. The law will protect them and keep them in place until bailiffs come with an eviction order from the court. And they know it. And that is a risk that all landlords take. And so any improvement that's going to be made by the government must punish bad behavior on both tenant and landlord side and must not punish good landlords or good tenants because of the few bad behaved ones. And that's what's going to happen with this bill. In 25 years, I have never seen and heard so many landlords going, look, I've held on. It started going wrong 7 years ago and Shelter came out with their stupid lobbying that we told them, we warned them would end up with rents going up and they didn't listen to us. We've tried to hang on, we've tried to be reasonable, but it's just not worth it anymore. You can literally get a better yield putting your money in the bank in a high interest savings account than you can from some of these landlords. And to get the yield as a landlord, it's actually not just set it and forget it. It's work. It's work, it's liability, and it's risk. And I'm not saying poor landlords here, okay? I'm saying that private landlords assume a commercial risk. And in a free market, that's how it works. Private landlords are under no obligation to meet social housing needs or the government's failure to meet housing needs. There's not the private rental sector's problem, okay? Because if you are going to say, well, it just should be, and they should be charging reasonable rent. Well, guess what? A reasonable rent is the market rent. There are no circumstances where that's not the case. And there are places in the country where rent is very, very cheap. And there are empty properties that no one's renting because people don't want to live there. And so the market means that those properties are sitting empty or are rented on very cheap rents. Okay, but we hear the squealing and the loud complaining because that sells media and sells newspapers and gets votes and gets clicks, right, and makes you popular. And it leads to this massively unwise situation we've got happening now. Now, what I'm hoping is that if people understand on both sides, landlords and tenants, understand that actually you both need and want the same thing. Long-term stable tenancies is what good landlords and good tenants need. If you've got a bit of money, think, oh, I don't know where to put this money. Oh, I need to put it somewhere for 2 or 3 years. Oh, I know I'll be a landlord, and then that's a terrible reason to be a landlord. And I actually know I've had people contact me and say that's what I've done, and it was a horrible mistake, and now I can't sell my property, and I can't get my tenant out, and it's cost me money, and I've lost money. It is not somewhere that you just go and pop your money in on a deposit account and get landlord income from it. It doesn't work like that. So if you're a tenant or a landlord or an observer or a journalist or anyone wondering how we got here, it is a combination of factors, almost all of which you can trace back to government policy, sometimes nationally, sometimes locally. But dealing with badly behaved landlords who are breaking the rules is solved by enforcing the rules, not by making more rules that you're not going to enforce. If you were to go along with this idea of capping rents, which there is endless evidence that it does not work, unless you just decide to become a communist country and the government sets rents for everyone and that's it. But while we remain relatively, or theoretically at least, a free market economy, that can't happen, because if it did, all the cheap rents in the cheap places would go up. It doesn't work. There are countries around the world you can look at it when you get that kind of intervention, and it doesn't work. And anyway, to get from where we are to that scenario where it might possibly work is a complete radical shift and change of how a market operates, which would take years to do, right? So number one, lack of government enforcement, and number two is not enough rentable homes being built where they're needed. And the Renters Reform Bill doesn't deal with either of those problems. Now, Labour's house building promises, if they meet them in the right places with affordable built to rent stuff and they build social rental homes, maybe on the building side, I remain hopeful but not optimistic that they will actually succeed in building more affordable homes to buy and to rent in the places that they're needed. Okay, but that's not what this bill is about. Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner, this is quoting from the government's press release. I'll get on screen just so you can see I'm not making this up. Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner said, renters have been let down for too long. Yeah, but so have landlords, right? So have good landlords. And too many are stuck in disgraceful conditions. That's a failure to enforce existing regulations. Powerless to act because of the threat of a retaliatory eviction hanging over them. Again, that is a lack of enforcement of the rules, because landlords aren't actually allowed to threaten that. I know that they silently use it. And sorry, by the way, there are parts of this bill that I don't object to. And I'm going to go through all the parts in a minute. She goes on to say, most landlords act in a responsible way, but a small number of unscrupulous ones are tarnishing the reputation of the whole sector. This is true. So why punish the entire sector, Angie? Tarnishing the whole sector by making the most of the housing crisis and forcing tenants into bidding wars. No, nobody is forcing anyone into a bidding war. When a privately owned thing for sale or rent comes to the market and lots of people want it, you always get a bidding war. What are you going to do? Are you going to cap house prices as well? Oh, we can't have bidding wars if you're selling a house. No. You set the asking price and you can't have more than that. Huh? Why not do that to sales as well as lettings, Angie? Because first-time buyers can't afford homes just as badly. It's a ridiculous rule that I'll come on to about they're talking about that they're going to actually make it legally against the law to have agents or landlords accepting more than asking price. Okay, this is government intervention that will mess stuff up and will drive landlords out of the market, making the supply problem worse. Even though some of those landlords will sell to other landlords and some will sell to first-time buyers, then there is a slight overall net reduction in supply when landlords sell up. And it goes on to say, we must overhaul renting and rebalance the relationship between tenant and landlord. There's nothing wrong with the existing relationships between good tenants and good landlords. Okay? You're going to try and fix the wrong thing. Where tenancies work well, nothing needs changing. So this is a hammer to crack a nut that's going to have unintended consequences. I want to show you how this is not like made up. So back in 2017, this is February 2017, okay? This property website said, because Shelter, which is the housing charity, Shelter support the restrictions on finance cost relief for individual landlords and completely ignore the overwhelming evidence that this will cause rental inflation and an increase in homelessness, especially of the most needy in society who are benefits dependent. This is what was warned. It was literally warned. And this is what happened to rent prices. Right? This is on the government's ONS website. So back here, 2017 was actually, rents were falling. They were falling. 2017 rents were falling. This is rental inflation. It was coming down. And in 2017, they began to phase in the new legislation, the Section 24 changes, that kind of stuff. And it was phasing over several years until it got to 2020. And then look what happened. And I know we had the pandemic and that messed a lot of stuff up. But since then, look at it. Look at what's happened to rents since they made those changes. And there have been hundreds of thousands of landlords exiting the sector because of the changes that were put forward by Shelter, by the lobby group, to help tenants. And no one in the media is talking about this mistake and how badly it's backfired. This is just free for all to see. But the raging, angry, we landlords bad, poor tenants, we just deserve cheap homes. Yeah, you deserve affordable homes. Everyone deserves an affordable home, absolutely. But you can't just go, so we're going to blame landlords because that sounds like the good thing to do. We haven't done our research. We're just going to blame the landlords and yeah, bad landlords. Look what's happened. Look what's happened, right? That's what happens if you don't allow good landlords to make a reasonable return on their business. If you want more homes, you need more landlords. If you need more landlords and you change the law to make less landlords, what's going to happen? And homelessness as well shot up from 30,000 in 2018 to 52,000 in 2023. So well done, Shelter. Great work. You were warned, you were told, you didn't listen, and you haven't acknowledged that notwithstanding some of the good work that Shelter does, this was a catastrophic backfiring. And I can't believe no one's talking about it. Right, let's actually get into the Renters Reform Bill and we'll pick apart the good and the bad and the ugly from it. Hi everybody. Sorry, I haven't said hello to everyone in the evening. Hi guys. This is so important, right? And it doesn't matter who you are. This affects us all. This affects us all as a country, because if we're going to end up with more and more young people being unable to afford homes and unable to afford to live where they want to work, this affects everybody. This is a massive problem, and they've got to listen to the industry before they make these changes, or that it's going to backfire horribly. And the mistakes that have already been made are going to be made worse. Right. Let me now read you, in a nutshell, the 9 or 10 things that they're proposing. Okay, and you can, again, read this yourself if you want to. But so first and foremost, this is the headline thing. They're going to ban Section 21, also known as no-fault evictions. Now, the way they're proposing to do it isn't good, but I do agree with the premise that a tenant who has not breached their contract and a tenant who has paid their rent on time and is in work should not be made homeless at the expense of the taxpayer and their own life with only 60 days notice. it's just, I 100% support a change in the law that means if you have been a well-behaved tenant, you need more notice than that to get out. I accept that there are landlords who will need to get their properties back a certain time, but you're just going to have more notice, because the disadvantage to a tenant who's got a nice, calm, stable life and a job, and their job's going well, they're paying their rent, they're looking after the property. Oh, you got 60 days to find a new home. Well, I can't. Sorry, it's not my problem. At the moment, that's what can happen, and it can't and shouldn't be allowed to happen in that way. So I do support an increase in the notice period. And also, I would support the power for, if that tenant goes to the council and says, I am being evicted under Section 21 or whatever its replacement is, and I cannot find a home, and the council looks and goes, well, you're going to be our problem if that is the case, so let's just verify that's the case. And if the council verifies it is the case, and again, I haven't thought through the ways this might be abused or not, but assuming it can't be abused, it could be actually policed properly, then the council has the power, in order to prevent that person being made homeless. And I know landlords won't like this, right? But if you can't accept this, then you shouldn't be a landlord, right? That your tenant has the right to stay, provided they're paying their rent, only, until they can be rehoused. So yes, there is a risk of a landlord that you can't get your property back when you want to, but you will be getting your rent paid. And it's obviously absolutely dependent on the fact that the tenant is in keeping with the terms of the tenancy agreement. Now, if the tenancy term is a fixed term and it starts and ends with a fixed term and a fixed end date, that's a different scenario. And I'm not suggesting that they have the right to stay in after that. No, I'm talking about one of those open-ended tenancies, okay? A periodic tenancy where there is no agreed end date. Secondly, without the court backlog system being overhauled, again, banning Section 21 is going to have a horrible, maybe unintended, but completely predictable side effect. So banning Section 21 evictions before they've got the replacement idea in place to handle these so they can be handled more quickly is a bad idea. They want to rush it through and get it done by next summer. So the second point, the notice period that a landlord must give a tenant if they want to sell the property or if they want to move back in is to be extended. I do support that. And for landlords who go, well, I want my property back in 90 days, you can still do that now. You should do that now if you're not happy to have an extended notice period. But most decent, reasonable landlords who aren't like operating on the wafer thin property profit margins will be okay with that, I think. Pets allowed, yeah, okay, but it's got to be taken into account that pets living in a property can destroy a property. They can do a lot of damage to a property, and that must be taken into account. The landlords should not be required to accept the damage risk. So people are charging slightly more rent for a pet. I don't think that's right, but I do think that you may have to add a larger deposit or some kind of insurance against it or something to incentivize the tenant to not just let their animals soil the property, because that's what some tenants do, right? And that's not okay, and we never hear about that. So pets allowed, yeah, whatever. That's not a big one. Awab's law extended into the PRS section. So yes, that's absolutely, I agree with that, and that's a welcome change. Awab's law, that poor 2-year-old boy who died because of the damp in the socially rented flat that the council didn't fix. The law already applies to social homes, and it's being extended to the private rented sector. Yeah, sorry, if you don't have a decent, safe home for a family to live in, you shouldn't be allowed to rent it to people. So I 100% support that. The next one is they're going to ban landlords discriminating against tenants with children or those in receipt of benefits. It's quite difficult. If a landlord's getting multiple offers, it's quite hard to police that anyway, because landlords are absolutely entitled to, and there's nothing to change this, to choose. If they've got multiple tenants offering, they're entitled to choose which tenant they want. And you would, because of the risk. If you get a good tenant, it's great. It's happy days for the landlord and the tenant for a long time. And that is what mostly happens. But the bad ones are terrible, and the bad tenants are terrible too. So the decent home standards we applied to PRS, and that means that's not the same as AWAB's law. That I think is meaning upgrades to property is going to be required. This is one of the most stupid ones. Banning bids above asking price. Today is the first I've heard of this idea. It's the worst and most stupid idea I've heard. I understand the intention. Why should a landlord want more than they want? Why don't they just say how much they want, and they can't accept more than that? I get that. That's the very quick back of a fag packet idea someone's come up with, but they haven't thought it through. They haven't thought it through. Let's say you're a landlord and you're expecting £1,500–1,600 a month for your property. The law is not going to determine what asking price you can set. So you can just set an asking price at £2,500 and say, but happy to just make me an offer, anything you like. So you put the asking price up there, which will have the effect of making properties look more unaffordable. Either that, or they'll simply do an auction in the same way that they auction homes. Now, I don't know this. I haven't had enough chance to look at the detail. I saw someone saying that they were going to actually make it illegal to do that. I don't understand. In the private sector, people selling or renting stuff should be allowed to avail themselves of whatever the market value is. I mean, what are you going to do? Are you going to do the same to hotels on big match weekends and say you can't put your prices up on a big match weekend? Can't do that. Well, a lot of hotels literally, they can't just allow market prices to be tracked. If they start the government telling them what they can and can't charge, it's going to go out of business. Airlines, it's the same. What are you going to start doing? Say that airlines can't charge a premium on busy flights? Don't be stupid. It's seasonal. It's the same thing. You can't mess with a market like this. It will always go wrong and backfire. Always. So saying that neither agents nor landlords can accept above asking price is one of the most unspeakably ill thought out ideas I've ever heard in the private renter sector. Because it won't give you the result you want of tenants having cheaper rents. It won't. That's not what will happen. Just haven't thought this through. Ban on in-tenancy rent increases, only annual increases allowed. Well, again, what you're doing there is you're punishing the good guys because of the bad guys, because there are landlords and tenants who have a really good relationship, who like flexibility, and they talk occasionally, and occasionally, you don't want to stop a landlord being able to, after several years, make a small rent increase when they need to for valid reasons. This is, again, it's not a good idea. I don't think it will solve a problem. Yes, there are a few small landlords who are abusing their position, but this isn't. You don't take a hammer to crack a nut. You don't tar everyone with the same brush. Introduction of a new private renter sector database to inform landlords on obligations for compliance. Yeah, that's a perfectly good idea. What should happen, I think, is this. To be a landlord, you need a license. And if you are a landlord without a license, then you must use a licensed letting agent. All right? So either you as a landlord are licensed, which means you've been checked as being in a position to be a responsible, decent landlord. But if you are someone who wants to be a landlord or an accidental landlord, but you don't have a license, you must then go through a licensed letting agent. That simple change would solve so many of these problems. Right? It would flush out most of the crooked landlords. It would flush them out, and it would be much easier than all this. Anyway, guys, I'd love to know. Let me just have a look. So, okay, what is this going to mean in the market? It's almost certainly going to result in more smaller landlords selling up. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It depends, okay? If the landlords on wafer thin, tiny profit margins because they're highly leveraged up and interest rate rises recently have been killing them, and they can't get any more rent out of them because the market rent won't pay any higher, and those guys are forced to sell up. That's not a bad thing because it's not good for their tenants, right? Any tenant in a property that they like, where the landlord decides to sell or is forced to sell, is disruptive and bad, and that's bad. That's going to be a bad outcome from this, right? And there are, I think, 1 in 5 of all homes on the market at the moment are ex-rental properties, which is really, it's like twice as much as usual. 40% of them are being bought by other landlords. Now that's a good thing because that's what you've got there. Is you've got the smaller amateur landlords selling up, and the larger, and I don't mean the big corporate ones. I'm talking about the sort of professional, medium-sized landlord businesses, where they're small, privately owned businesses. They've got a portfolio of properties, but they operate it and manage it like a business. If they're buying it up, hopefully the tenant can stay put. And I always say to small landlords, see if you can sell with your tenants in situ. It's quicker, it's easier, it's better for the tenant, and often it's the best outcome for you as well. Or a lot of them, if they're suitable for first-time homes, a lot of them are being bought by first-time buyers. And when that happens, if that first-time buyer was a tenant, then you've removed one unit of demand from the rental market. So it nets itself out. But for first-time buyers who are currently living with their parents and not paying rent, who then decide to first-time buy, that is taking a rental unit out of the supply. So overall, you're going to have, each time, when you've got hundreds of landlords selling up, there's going to be a small reduction in the supply. So for every 100 being sold, 40 are going to other landlords, 60 going to first-time buyers. Of those first-time buyers, however many of them are living with parents, let's just make up a number and say, of those 60, it's 20. Then under that example, 20% of landlord stock being sold up is actually reducing rental supply. So landlords selling up is definitely not going to increase supply. It's going to slightly decrease supply. That's likely to happen. So, I mean, yeah, you see, a free market is very far from perfect. And I know that there are people who are very angry with landlords, think landlords are just greedy. I mean, humans are, by their very nature, greedy. We are greedy beings. Okay, we always have been, as far back in history as you go. It's you can't say, oh, they're greedy, but they're not. And free enterprise has been shown again and again to be the fastest route to prosperity for communities and countries as a whole when they're well run. Look at Scandinavia, for example. When you start punishing people because they're good at what they do, in other words, they get high prices for their product. I mean, is it greedy to want your business to make a profit? Now, I'm not saying that there aren't cases where market rents are horribly high and some landlords act really nastily and they do exploit it. There are those cases. That is true. But they are not the majority by any means. Okay, so let's take a few comments here. So DP says, I guess the idea is to make asking rents binding on the landlord. Yeah. But it's the thing is, if the landlord can set the asking rent, all that they're going to do is set it higher so that they avoid the risk of renting it below market rent. Because you've got to remember, right, when markets goes down, the landlords have to accept that too. So you can't cap their upside unless you stop their downside as well. And you either go, right, rents are fixed. That's just like anyone who's done a commission job where the more you sell, the more commission you make until you reach a certain cap, and then after that you don't make any more commission. Like, what's the point? I'll just stop selling then. Yeah, someone called LinkedIn user says increase the supply and the cost will reduce. It's really that simple. In the lettings market, that is true. Sneaky Linux says, best thing you've said, Charlie. Landlords should have a license. Enough said. Yep. It's got some good comments and questions here. Okay. Ural Jones. So I don't know who you are, Ural Jones. You're a fresh name. Welcome to the channel. It says housing is a human right, correct? Which is separate from most other businesses. That's why we have social housing. But human rights have to be paid for by somebody. And this is the thing that a lot of people just think, oh, because it's a human right, we should just get it. Yeah, but what about who's going to pay for it? Well, it doesn't matter. Well, the taxpayer pays for it. Okay, but then the taxes go up and that affects everyone. It's like, you show me an example of a prosperous country with higher than average standards of living where it isn't a free market. And if you look at what's happening in Argentina right now, in just a few months that Javier Milei has ended, he's taken over as prime minister from the previous social government, housing supply has shot up. The rents have come down, the availability of property has gone up, and suddenly quality of life and for housing is improving rapidly because he's gone to a free market. You can refuse to stay at a hotel if the price doesn't suit you, but everyone needs a house to live in. Yes, okay, so everyone needs a house to live in. I agree with you. I agree that everyone needs a house to live in. And that's what I do. That's what I'm campaigning for. That's what I work towards in my website, Best Agent. Everything I'm doing, my entire career is devoted to trying to get everyone a house to live in. But someone has to pay. And I don't understand anyone who thinks, well, the government pays. The government doesn't have money. It's taxpayer money. And the government is like a business with guaranteed customers. You pay us or you go to prison. You pay us or you go bankrupt, right? The government is, and therefore the government's not cost conscious. And when the government gets into debt, it's not the government getting into debt, it's the taxpayer getting into debt, and taxes go up. And guess what's happening? No, I'm sorry. There are certain places, like, would you let people drive a car without a license? No, it would be fucking stupid to do that. And when you've got landlords behaving as badly as they are now, a license actually is one of the rare occasions, because housing is a human right and because we as a country depend so much on people having stable, reliable, safe housing. It doesn't need to be that complicated, but a simple license to be a landlord, I don't know any good landlord who would object to that. A good landlord would go, yeah, absolutely fine, why not? And actually, if you're a good landlord, it would be good for you because it would get rid of the bad landlords. I actually think, Elliot Goodfellow, it would reduce bureaucracy. If you licensed landlords, it would reduce the bureaucracy that we're currently suffering from that's killing the private renter sector. Yeah, Christian Bravery says, every right you claim equals a responsibility someone else has to meet. Quite right, quite right. And Green Goose says, if my rental property doesn't make a profit, I won't be in business. Exactly. So if you can't, food is also a human right, okay? And the government doesn't provide any free food. It's food banks and soup kitchens that do. Everyone else is providing food. No one seems to object to the fact that food companies and food providers need to make a profit. Why do people object to landlord businesses making a profit? It doesn't make sense. Tarek A says, I'm just completing on a flat with a Brighton with a tenant. So Tarek, I assume you're a landlord, right? Can you tell us why the landlord was selling up? K-Art says the government really needs to deliver on their house building promise. They do. But more than that, they need to build more social homes themselves. The taxpayer needs to build social homes that the taxpayer owns so that the taxpayer reduces its costs on housing people that the government are obliged to house. Yeah, you have to have licenses for being HMO, that kind of stuff. There are some licenses, but for ordinary like accidental landlords, no licenses required. All right, guys. Thanks very much for that. I just wanted to get that out there, and please spread that word. Okay, this renters bill contains some good things, but some very bad things that are going to backfire. And just go and look at what Shelter did, and then look at what happened to rent prices afterwards, if you want to see what I'm talking about. Well, I've been rambling for a long time. Any last minute questions before I go? Guys, I'm going to go anyway. I need to go. I'm tired, but I will see you soon. Lots more videos coming soon, and a lot more focusing on moving. And it's very, very nice for once to do a video about the rental market, and I will be doing more of that. I'm planning to do regular rental, moving home rental videos. Thanks for watching, guys. See you on the next one, and please share this with anyone you think needs to watch it.